Armenia was a communist nation. It was a part of the Soviet Union, even though it was it's a Christian country. It's had a strong roots in Christianity, but when the Soviet Union was formed, Armenia became a part of it, and so that became a huge roadblock to religious life in Armenia. There were churches that were destroyed. The religion just became put on the side, and just a very not acceptable part of society. And for a lot of Armenians, that didn't sit very well, and so they still had that faith, even though they had to practice it privately. And so it was really a very prepared place when the Lord brought the gospel. These were people that had a culture of faith, and they hadn't been able to express it for decades. And so it was about 1990. The Soviet Union was falling or just fallen. I can't remember, when there was a huge earthquake in the city of Gyumri and Spitak, and it was devastating, and there were thousands of people killed in both Gyumri and Spitak, and they still remember it to this day. It's a very tragic memory for them, but it endeared the sympathy of the world, and there were a lot of people that donated, especially members of the church, one of them being John Huntsman Sr. He donated a lot of money, and he actually ended up building a concrete factory in Armenia. And so Armenians were extremely grateful to John Huntsman and to his efforts that he did. And that was kind of the foothold of how the church got started, was John Huntsman doing this act of charity along with the church. The church was also helping out with that, but people still remember John Huntsman's name there and what he did. And I think that gave the Armenians an impression of what the LDS church stood for, and so that when the church wanted to come, it wasn't something that they were afraid to let in once the Soviet Union had fallen. And so once the missionaries started there were so many people that had been starving to hear the word of the Lord, who had been starving to feel the Spirit, that were answered the call once the missionaries started coming. And so that was about 20 years ago. There were a couple branches started. I think there was about 9 branches started over that time. And I think, like most places, it had its ups and downs of productivity and becoming stronger and weakening. But over these last 5 years or so, the church really started to make strong gains, and it started to move forward. And there were so many miracles that you could see that the Lord was really preparing Armenia and Eastern Europe as a whole to really go forward and to take its place in the gathering of Israel. There's so many special people there in Armenia, and there's so much faith that when the Lord stretched forth his hand, the people were ready. And now there's a stake. They organized a stake there. There had been 2 districts before, and then right when I got to Armenia, they merged those 2 districts for the purpose of preparing to become a stake. So they just had these 2 districts and all these branches, but then they merged those 2 districts. They merged a couple of the branches for the purpose of getting stronger branches that could become wards. And then I had the privilege over the next 2 years of seeing those branches develop and the members in them develop and learn and grow, because there was so many functions that were performed by the missionaries when I first started. And then the members, they grew and they took those responsibilities on. They have a stake president now, a patriarch, and they're all Armenians, and they're doing their calling so incredibly. And that when I saw them learning and doing their callings, it was a great example to me, because I realized how much more faith they had than I did. They were pioneers. They hadn't had this their whole life, but they picked it up and they devoted so much of their lives to it that the church would be nothing like it is today without the consecration and the dedication of those members who sacrificed so much for it. And so that's really how the church got started and how the church got to where it is now. It took about 20 years to get that first stake. but they have a goal to have a second stake in 4. And they're moving strongly towards it, and I firmly believe they'll get it because they're just so strong and so faithful.